Welcome to the Nerdstalgic podcast with your host, the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm.
Howdy folks, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Nerdstalgic podcast with me, your host Luke. Hope you're all doing well, hope you're all good as per usual. Today's episode is going to be a bit different. I'm going to be returning to my roots. What I mean by that is I'm going to do a bit of a story time first, and then we're going to get into it. But before I do, gotta do a bit of busyness first. So today's business is the same business it's been for past couple of weeks now. But for anybody who's new to the channel or anybody who listens to the older episodes, you will know that this episode, this show and this episode is sponsored by World of Books. The lovely people at World of Books has given me a fantastic deal, a 10% off code for you folks at home to save some money on your purchases. So using the code NERDY10, that's NERDY 10, all higher case at checkout, that'll bag you 10% off all of your shopping. World of Books, they primarily do a lot of books. They save a lot of books from landfills, charity shops, that sort of thing. But they also sell video games on there, retro and new. You can find the likes of PlayStation 2, PlayStation 1, go as far as Xbox and Xbox 360, PlayStation 4, 5, Xbox Series X. The list is endless. They do vinyls on there as well if you're looking for some vinyl records that you can't find. So get on there now. This code is available from today till the end of the year. So jump on it. That's nerdy10 at checkout and save yourself 10% off. And thank you, World of Books, for sponsoring this episode and the show. So as I've mentioned, I'm going back to my roots. I'm going back to my format. As I said, I'm going to tell a bit of a story. For anybody who, as I mentioned, this is the first time listening to the show, welcome, thank you. For anybody who's been a listener from the beginning, will know that originally, before I started doing podcasting, I was a book reviewer. I still technically am a book reviewer, to be honest. Not professionally, I wasn't paid for it. I did have a few companies reach out to me, like Titan Books, for example, and they would send me books in return of an honest review. So I'd get the book for free. It'd be a pre-release copy, and I would review it by a set date, and then I would post that on the release of the book. And it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. I don't do it as much as mainly because I don't have free time, not because of the podcast. I ended up having to decline a lot of the books that I was offered, because I just didn't have the room for them. My bedroom, it's huge, but it's not very big when you actually look at how many books I own and how many books I've read and how many books I need to read. And the amount of books I need to read is a lot more than the books I've read, if that makes sense. So I had to decline it. And obviously, as time's gone on, I did sort of Bookstagram which was on Instagram, which is where it's a basic thing. You read a book, you take a photo with yourself with the book, and then below in the sort of section below that, the bio or whatever, you would write your review, and then you write your synopsis and your thoughts and your ratings at the end. And I'd done that for years, since like 2018. And then obviously time went on, looking for new hobbies during lockdown, and then I discovered podcasting, and I spent about 2 years researching podcasting and how podcasting works and how they're structured and how what people like and people don't like. I've told that story before, but the reason the first part pertains to this episode is the fact that I decided that I want to do a book review. I've done a few book reviews in the past, but I felt that for the month of August, I want to do a few book reviews, get back to my roots, because I've done a lot of video games, I've done a lot of movies, and I've done a lot of other nerdy things, but I haven't really spoken about one of my sort of major passions, one of the things that I love the most, which is reading. Which one of the funniest things, I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday about doing the podcast, and I actually just admitted, which I knew it to myself, I admitted it out loud, was the fact of I haven't read as much as I usually would since doing the podcast. Like, doing a podcast, it's a lot of fun and I enjoy it. But it's a lot of time. There's a lot of work into it. The choosing of the topic, like it gets to the point that everywhere that you look is content. So you play a video game for the first time or for the millionth time, and you think, oh, I could talk a lot about this content. You know what I mean? You look at a book and you're like, that'd be good content. You look at a movie, content. Everywhere you look is content, content, content. Eventually, it gets so overwhelming that you're so focused on trying to pick one thing to talk about, researching it, writing notes, and then sitting down and recording, and then editing, and then releasing, and hopefully people like it. It's a lot that goes into it. It takes away a lot of other things. So it is one of those sort of things where it's the fact if I love to read, I just don't get the time. So I mostly spend a majority of my time listening to audiobooks. But I managed to squash out a few books this year. Well, I say a few. I've read about 108 so far this year. But some of them are graphic novels, some of them are audiobooks, and then some of them are physical books as well as ebooks. So it's kind of split between the two because I'm always on my phone or my tablet. So it's always one of them things of like, well, if I'm on the tablet, I can read an ebook, So I'm always trying to read as much as possible. The reason behind all this is the fact of just to explain to you what I mean when I say I'm going back to my roots. So I'm going back to something that I haven't done in a long time, and I hope you folks enjoy it. You know what I mean? Like I always talk about the things that I love. I always said since day one of starting doing this was the fact of I would not compromise. I would always talk about things that I love and that I'm passionate about. And if people like it, fantastic. And if people don't, I'm still going to talk about it because I like it or I enjoy it. As long as I'm happy and I'm not hurting anybody's feelings, which I never tried to, then there's no harm in it, really. So that's me rambling. That's me sort of my long-winded side quest storytelling sort of way of explaining what I mean about returning to my roots. I haven't got many books planned, but there'll be a few coming in throughout August, and hopefully you'll enjoy them. So today's episode, I decided that I'm going to talk about Ready Player 2 as well as Ready Player 1. These are books written by Ernest Cline. If you haven't heard of them, you've most likely seen the movie by Steven Spielberg that came out in 2019. Yeah, I think it was like 2019 that movie came out. I was just going to give I've recently finished Ready Player 2. I've got mixed feelings about it, and I feel like it'd be a good topic to talk about. But firstly, I wanted to do a quick sort of refresher, shall we say, sort of a go back and look at the first book, the book I actually had a lot of enjoyment on and I had the most fun with. So this episode, this topic, is mostly going to be me talking about my joys of the first book and what I liked about it, what it meant to me, what I was doing when I found out about the book and when I read the book, because they sort of one in the same and kind of the reason why I started reading the book in the first place. And then I'm going to give my thoughts and feelings on Ready Player 2. There are going to be open spoilers, I will say that, because it's kind of difficult to talk about why I dislike this book, the second book mostly, without going into spoilers. So if you haven't read Ready Player 2, obviously when we get there, I will mention it again. That there will be spoilers to give people time to kind of jump ship and then come back later when they've read the book. So that's going to be today's topic. Going back to my roots, having a look at Ready Player 1 and Ready Player 2. Might even talk about the movie a bit because I quite enjoyed the movie. And yeah, so hopefully you folks enjoy it. Hopefully you folks like it. So without further ado, let's get into Ready Player 1, shall we? All right, guys, let's get into it. Right, so Ready Player 1. Let's start at the beginning. Let's start with the first book, the book that started it all. You know what I mean? The book that kind of inspired me in gaming. You know, what gaming could be, what books could be. You know, it's one of them sort of sci-fi novels. Like, I'm not really big into reading modern day books. It would be sci-fi fantasy. I don't like reading modern books, mainly because I'm old school and I am one of these sort of people that goes, well, why should I read a new book when there's so many amazing old books out there that need to be read first before I, go read most modern books. So I'm not a big modern book reader. You know, I tend to stay clear. But when I heard the synopsis for Ready Player One, and a lot of people online, mostly YouTube, were talking about how good this book was. I had to give it a go. Um, I love telling stories. I'm going to tell a bit of a story here. But the thing that drew me to this book the most is that when it came out, if I remember correctly, I think this book came out. Let me check. I've got the book in my hand here. Let me scroll. Usually, where's the contents page? So this book first came out in 2011, right? I think I got this around 2013, 2014. Yeah, I think I got this around about 2014 because that's when I started college. Um, but basically to explain my story, because I love telling my stories, is that uh, in 2014 I finished school. So I was, oh, hold on, I think I was about 16 years old, and I've told this story before, so I'm going to be a bit quick with this part of the story, and then we'll get into the meaty part of it. It was a 6 weeks holiday. Bored out my tree. I'd played every video game that I had to complete. I'd watched every movie I had to catch up on, every TV show. I was done with everything in the first week. That left me then with 5 weeks of nothing, and it was lovely. It was sunny. I could sit outside, but like, what's the point sitting outside if there's nothing to do? I'm white as a ghost because I'm ginger, so I burn. Well, I tan, but me and heat just don't go very well, so it wouldn't make sense for a ginger person to sit out in the sun for 5 weeks. um I don't think it'd be very a good idea anyway. So I had a big stack of books in my room, and I figured, why not? I've got everything else to do, and I sat and I read this whole stack of books within the 5 weeks, and that kind of sparked my love of reading, and that's all she wrote since then. Really, I've just read constantly. Like, I never go anywhere without a book. I'm always got a book in my hand. I'm always reading or listening to an audiobook at home, and that's why I've managed to. I'm one book away from reading 800 books in my life. You know what I mean? So you can tell that I'm addicted to reading. It's one of my biggest hobbies, and I enjoy it. That's where it started. So after the 60s happened, I started college. When I was in college, I did a level 3 extended diploma in computing, because I'd already done my level 1 and 2 in school. And the teacher had basically said, well, usually if you're coming straight from school, that we usually put you into level 2. But because I did ICT in my final year at school and got my level 3, the woman who interviewed me, she was basically like, well, there's no point you doing your level 2 all over again. You already have it. We'll put you in for the level 3, but we'll put you in for the extended diploma. Which basically, it's a normal level 3. The only difference is that you have 2 to 3 extra modules on top of the normal sort of level. So I ended up doing that, and the main idea was that I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do something with computers at the time, but I wasn't sure as to what to do. Like, one of the upsides of having an IT sort of degree is the fact of when you have it, especially getting it in England. You could go anywhere in the world. You could go to Germany, you could go to China, Japan, you could go to Spain, Africa, America. You go anywhere basically. There's me just listing places, but you can literally, if you get a degree in the UK, especially if it's something like computing, they want that all over the world. So whatever I wanted to do, I could do. Wherever I wanted to go, I could go with this degree. Me being very sort of me and being creative, I was like, well, I want to do either animation or game design. Sadly, there was only in level 3, there was only like one course that kind of dealt with game design, and if I wanted to do that, I would have had to look into go into university to do it properly, like really focused on it. So what I ended up doing, so I did my level 3, did through that. It was fantastic. I did 2 years there. I think I was in my first year though. I think it was my first year, 2015, and I remember this is when I think when the book started getting popularity, when Ready Player One was started to become um, more popular. Like I said, it came out in 2011, but I feel like it started to gain traction as a lot of the YouTubers started to read it and was like, whoa, this is blowing me away. And obviously that grew traction there, because that's where I heard about it first, was like the early days of IGN and the early days of Rooster Teeth and stuff like that. And Funhouse, they would talk about how good this book is. And obviously, me being a young bean and me being into game design and hearing about this book is to do with virtuality and video games and nostalgia, which is all things that I love, as you guys know, listening to this podcast, the Nerdstalgic podcast, kind of on the nose. But it just rung so many bells for me. So I remember I asked my mum if she could get it me. She was very kindly to get it me, to buy it me, and I basically just sunk a lot of my time, which I should have been studying, into reading sort of this book, and it became um, one of them sort of moments where, like, again, I don't read modern books, but it was one of them books that I just read. It was like it felt old, it felt like it was written during the six, not 60s, during the 70s and 80s, 90s. It didn't feel modern. It just felt old fashioned sci-fi. It just felt good. um and then when you look into Ernest Cline, the writer, and you find that he's done movies. He did one of my favorite indie movies, which doesn't get a lot of love. It's called Fanboys. And the basic idea behind that movie is the fact of these lifelong friends been absolutely over the moon when it comes to Star Wars. They're huge Star Wars fans, but huge Star Wars nerds. Basically, one of their friends gets cancer. It's during like the late 90s, before Phantom Menace, and one of the friends get cancer, and the idea is that we're going to travel from where we are cross country to the Skywalker Ranch. I'm going to break into the Skywalker Ranch, and we're going to make sure that you get to see Phantom Menace, the newest Star Wars movie. Before he dies. It's a really lovely, touching, silly, geeky sort of movie. Fanboys, highly recommend it. It's got Dan Fogler in it. If you're a fan of Dan Fogler from like the Harry Potter movies or Meet the Goldbergs, Balls of Fury, he's a fantastic actor. He absolutely hilarious. Always brightens my day and makes me smile whenever I see him on TV. He does comic books as well. But yeah, he's in it. Absolutely amazing film. Highly recommend that. But like, he directed that and he wrote it, and he's done loads of other things. So I knew who he was, and then I started reading the book, and it kind of sort of, I could see where he was coming from. You know what I mean? Like, I could see what he was doing with this book, and it just felt um, amazing. It just felt really, really good. So that's my sort of side story about where I sort of heard about this book and why I started reading it. Like, honestly, when you're studying game design in a college setting, it's just, there's not many moments in life where you're doing the right thing in your life and then something else happens, or something comes out, like a movie or TV show or whatever, and that kind of so perfectly intertwines to what you're doing that it just kind of changes your whole perspective of what it is you want to do with your life. And that's how I felt with this book, was the fact of, I'm doing game design, I'm doing what I want to do. For my whole life, because of my dyslexia and of my learning disabilities, I was told that I couldn't do it. I finally got here. I'm doing my level 3 extended diploma. I've got amazing friends. I'm doing amazing things. This book comes out, changes my whole perspective of what not just writing can be, but the whole idea of game design and virtuality, and how virtuality is basically the future, which then led me to wanting to do virtuality when I went to college. Because when I went to university, I did 4 years of game design, specializing in virtuality and augmented reality. So it really did shape my future. Like, it led me in a different direction, because I was just going to do game design and then maybe just get an IT job, as most people do. But then I was like, well, no, I want to go do VR. I want to go do what is in this book. I want to be sort of the archetype. I want to be the person who sort of revolutionizes the technology, because it's still cutting edge, it's still bleeding edge, it's still relatively new. I wanted to get a degree in that. I want to get a bachelor. Well, I eventually got a bachelor's degree in it, and I want to go do it. You know what I mean? And it's just one of the moments where this book changed my life, changed the course and direction of where I was going and where I was heading. Um, I just owe it, all that. So going into this first book, I already had a lot of love. I already had a lot of feelings towards it before I even started reading it. And then I read it, and it blew me away. And I said, it changed my life. So that's my story about, my feelings towards this book and how much it means to me. This first book, that is Ready Player One. How much the first book means to me. So this is basically, at the moment I'm holding the book in my hand. Sadly, you can't see me because I'm not recording this visually, just audibly. But I've got the book in my hand, and as I do with my game, when we do the game reviews, I always get the book, the game case in my hand, and I talk about how it looks and that sort of thing. So I'm gonna try doing that with a book. It can't be so different. So on the front, you've got in big white and orange letters, Ready Player One. This was what I'm happy about this edition that I've got was before the the movie came out. So one thing I hate, and they do it, it always happens, but whenever a TV show that's based off a book or movie comes out, they always republish the book and then they put a huge, horrible, big embossed sticker thing on the front that goes, "Oh, you like the book? Oh, then now the motion picture's out soon." I'm like, no, fuck off, go away, stop ruining my books. So this edition that I've got is the UK edition, which I think it's for a lot of people is actually the best version in terms of design. The American version is very bland. The English version has Wade on the front, and he's climbing up the stacks. Because in this world, if you haven't read the book, where Wade lives, he lives in the far future, and the world's kind of gone to shit, climate change, war, that sort of thing. And because there's not a lot of room for people, they live in what's called a stack, which is, imagine a giant sort of tower made out of what they call now. It's not. I was going to say scale electrics, but that's the wrong thing. Meccano, is it Meccano? That sort of stuff. It's like loads of sort of scaffolding holding up basically caravans, one on top of each other, and people live inside these caravans, but they're called stacks, and that's what's on the front of this book. Wade's climbing up, and what else? You've got a quote on the front that from the USA Today, which is enchanting. Willy Wonka meets the Matrix. I completely agree with that. It's like come with me and you'll be in a world of pure imagination. It is pure imagination. You know what I mean? You go into this book and it's like going into Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. It also is the fact of, the VR aspect of it. You're going into the Matrix, going into the virtual world, going into the oasis, which is in this book. It just works. This book is a book that's made for the modern day. I think it would have done well in the past, but this book is one that's made for the modern age. It just works. Flipping the book around to the back, right? So on the back it says, the breakout sensation of the year, imagine the world at stake, an epic struggle between good and evil, the greatest quest in history, the fate of humanity resting in your hands, are you ready? Then you've got some more quotes. You've got 2011 was a strong year for science fiction, but one easily the standout work was Ready Player One. That's by the Daily Mail. You got one here by The Guardian. You've got the strength of Klein's first novel, other than its geeky referencing of 1980s pop culture, is the characterization of the candid like Wade and his redemptive quest in both VR and the real world. Then you've got another one by Patrick Ruth. I always butcher his last name, Patrick Rothfuss. This book pleased every geeky bone in my geeky body. I felt like it was written just for me. I felt like there's a blurb in here, because sadly there's no blurb on the back. Here we go. It's the year 2044, and the real world has become an ugly place. We're out of oil. We've wrecked the climate. Famine, poverty, and disease are widespread. Like most of humanity, Wade Watts escapes this depressing reality by spending his waking hours jacked into the Oasis, a sprawling virtual utopia where you can be anything you want to be here, where you can live and play and fall in love on any of 10,000 of the 10,000 planets. There should have been a there. That's my dyslexia acting up. Sorry. Anyway, and like most of humanity, Wade is obsessed by the ultimate lottery ticket that lies concealed within this alternate reality. Oasis founder James Holliday, who dies with no heir, has promised that control of the Oasis and his massive fortune will go to the person who can solve the riddles he has left scattered throughout his creation. For years, millions have struggled fruitlessly to attain this prize, knowing only that the riddles are based on Holliday's obsession with the 80s pop culture, and then Wade stumbles upon the key to the first puzzle, suddenly he finds himself pitted against thousands of competitors in a desperate race to climb the ultimate prize, a chase that soon takes on terrifying real-world dimensions and that will leave both Wade and his world profoundly changed. I remember reading that, and like I said, it blew me away. It just the idea that, again, I know I've already said it, but going back to the fact of I'm doing game design, virtuality is a new thing, and when I was in college, even though it was new, we're still talking about it in a hypothetical sort of way. Like it's a technology that's out, but there's not many people or companies doing anything with it, and it's still kind of the same now. There's more companies now than there was when I was in college studying it. So the idea that this was still a conceptual thing that we're still talking about, and then to kind of read a book where it's 2044, we're in the future, it's the concept is now reality, and it's more than what we'd ever imagined. It kind of blew me away, and yeah, I just kind of wish that I had a topic in college and in university where I had the opportunity to talk about this book and basically write a paper on it, which now thinking back would have been a good idea for a paper when I was doing my dissertation and all that. But I ended up choosing like storytelling in I think for my final paper that I wrote, it was oh hold on, it was narrative storytelling in collectibles in horror games. So the idea of how you get a collectible in a game, specifically horror games, and how they sort of tell a story. And I was talking about different ways that like different things in the games can do. I'm butchering it. It's been a while since I've read. I've still got the paper. I've got a copy of it. But it's been a while since I wrote it and read it. It's not my best work, to be honest. But I got a decent grade for it. I got a B. Can't argue with that. Anyway, so yeah, so that's Ready Player One. As I mentioned, I this book means a lot to me, and it reads so fantastically. It is a fantastic book. It is Willy Wonka meets the Matrix. It ends so well. The characters all like basically the beginning's amazing, the middle's intense, the end is very much nail biting, and it holds you on the edge of your seat. And then when it lets go of you at the very very end, everything just falls into place. Like there's no plot holes, there's nothing that needs to be sort of resolved because everything has been resolved. There's no need for a sequel. It just works fantastically as a standalone book. Yes, when I read it, I was like, I want more. As you do with any book that you enjoy, anything that you enjoy, very much so. You're like, I want more. I don't want this train to stop. I want to keep riding this train forever. But since now coming all the way back, because I read this 2014, 2015. It is now 2022. I think Ready Player 2 came out last year, so a long wait for the sequel. Was it worth it? Well, you've got to listen to part 2 to find out. No spoilers there. But yeah, so that's Ready Player 1. That's my thoughts and feelings. Going to go for a quick break now, and then after the break, come back, and then we'll dissect Ready Player 1. Ready Player 2, I mean. But before I do that, right, if you have me on Twitter, Nerdstalgic_pod, let me know on your thoughts and feelings of Ready Player 1. Mainly because I don't usually do this, but the reason I'm saying this now is I feel like a lot of people probably haven't read Ready Player 2 yet, and a lot of people are probably thinking about reading it, so I'd rather get this part out first before I get into the spoilers and ruin it for anybody, or anybody jump ship. So if you liked Ready Player 1, or if you read Ready Player 2 and you liked it or you didn't like it, let me know on Twitter at Nerdstalgic_pod your thoughts and feelings there. So, going to take a quick break now, and then we come back. We're going to talk about Ready Player 2. All right then, let's get into it, shall we? Right, so on to part 2. So I hope you're all rested. Hope you're all good. For those of you that haven't jumped ship, you still have time now. Like I said, I'm going to talk about Ready Player 2, the book. If you haven't read it yet and you want to read it, by all means, that's fine. If you want to jump ship and come back later, that's completely fine. I understand, because I will be talking about spoilers. Not loads, like not major spoilers, but enough to kind of help you to understand as to why I didn't like it as much, and I felt like it was a sequel that wasn't needed. So you still got time to jump ship. If you're still here, I'm going to count to 5 and then just get into it. So you've got until 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 1 3/4. Okay, so they're all gone. So that just leaves us lot who have read the book, or either those lot of you that really don't give a shit, which is fair as well. I wouldn't blame you for not giving a shit, because like the first book was a masterpiece and this book wasn't as good. So Ready Player Two. So twice. Well, before I get into it, I'll as you can tell, I'm a bit deflated about this book. It was a disappointment, but before I get into that part, I'm going to talk about the cover and the way the book looks, because that is probably one of the main things that I like about it the most, is just the edition that I have. So again, I've got the UK edition. This one's by Century. The other one was by Random Arrow Books. Um, this one is accompanied by Century. This is a hardback version that I've got. If you can hear it, look, can you hear that? That's a hardback version that I have. It's really nice. It looks beautiful. It kind of copies the design of the American one, because the American one just had like big letters, Ready Player One, and then Ernest Cline with an orange background. This one has a black background with pixel stars and in blue letters. I'm not sure what font it is, but in blue letters it says Ready Player Two, Ernest Cline, international #1 best-selling author of Ready Player One, which kind of makes me laugh, because Ready Player One is Ernest Cline's most successful book, but he did write another book called Armada. I mean, which if you've watched the classic movie, The Last Starfighter, which a lot of people haven't watched it, but if you haven't watched The Last Starfighter, highly recommend it. It's a great classic sci-fi film in the vein of Star Wars and gaming. It's fantastic. But he wrote a book called Armada. I liked it. I really, really enjoyed it. But if you go on Goodreads or you talk to many other people, it wasn't enjoyed by a lot. And to us, it's not one of them books that gets talked about enough of his. It's kind of Ready Player One and that's it, which is all fair enough, because again, it was his most successful book, and that's the one that people remember the most. They always remember your successes or your failures more than everything else that you do. That's just the way it works. That's the way it's always worked. So yeah, so that's the front of the book. The spine is really, really nice. It has little circles on it, different color circles. Again, it says Ready Player Two by Ernest Cline. On the back, again, no real blurb. It's just accolades, praise for Ready Player One. So USA Today, chanting, Willy Wonka meets the Matrix, an addictive read, part intergalactic scavenger hunt, part romance and all heart. Basically, these are all things, the accolades for the first book. I've already spoke about that one, so we won't get into all of them, but a lot of sort of accolades there. And then we open it up, and because it's a hardback and it's got a slip cover, the blurb is on the inside. One thing I do want to mention though is when you open this book for the first time, and this is what I don't know if this is the same for all editions or if this is only just for the hardback edition, but when you open it up for the first time, there's two sections. You've got the hardback part, and then you've got obviously the paper part, and it says Ready Level 2 Start, and it's designed to look like the classic sort of pixel art sort of games. But level 2, and you'd have your score in the top left, and you'd have your hearts on the right, or your life. Really, really nicely done. Like I said, the design of this book and the attention to detail is what I enjoy the most about it. The rest is a bit magoo, but we'll get into it. So this is the blurb. This is the description of what you get with this book. So, an unexpected quest, two worlds at stake. Are you ready? Days after winning Oasis, found at James Holliday's contest, Wade Watts makes a discovery that changes everything. Hidden within Holliday's vaults, waiting for his heir to find, lies a technological advancement that will once again change the world and make the Oasis 1,000 times more wondrous and attractive than even Wade dreamed possible. With it comes a new riddle and a new quest, the last Easter egg from Holiday, hinting at a mysterious prize. And an unexpected, impossibly powerful, and dangerous new rival awaits. One who will kill millions to get what he wants. Wade's life and the future of the Oasis are again at stake. But this time, the fate of humanity also hangs in the balance. Lovingly nostalgic and wildly original, as only Ernest Cline could conceive it, Ready Player 2 takes us on another imaginative, fun, action packed adventure through his beloved virtual universe and jolts us thrillingly into the future once again. So that's the blurb, that's the description of the book. On to my thoughts and feelings of this book. It's not bad. I know I make it out to seem bad, but it's not. Hype. I've mentioned this many times. Hype is a killer. Hype will kill anything. Hype killed I was going to say Cyberpunk, but Cyberpunk kind of killed Cyberpunk. But the hype for that book didn't help Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk 2077. You know what I mean? That game probably would have came out bad, but maybe if the hype wasn't there and people weren't pushing for it to be released, that maybe it would have stayed in the oven a bit longer and would have came out less broken. And it was the same for Halo Infinite. That game shouldn't have came out when it did, but because there were so many, people say fans. I don't believe they're fans, because if you're a fan, you'd rather wait till the game is completed and is out first. But people were rushing that game, saying we want it out now, bring it out now. We've already waited a year, blah 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 blah. And because of hype and everything that was around it, the game comes out. It's not a bad game, but like the hype sort of kind of killed it, and it's kind of died down now. And now kind of 343 is in kind of limp mode of trying to fix the game and add some features that should have been there when it first come out. I've mentioned this before, and I've talked about it many times with tons of different topics. But hype kills a lot of things, and this is the issue with this book, especially for me, was the fact of no sequel no sequel for anything ever needed to happen. Any movie, any book, TV show, film, whatever, video game, any film or anything like that never needed a sequel. Never needed to happen. No matter how many times that you watch a film and goes, oh, the sequel was better than the first one. It never needed to happen. It should have been one and done. But because there's money involved and because there's hype and there's enjoyment over what was ever the first thing that came out, sequels happen, But let's be honest with us, nothing needs a sequel. But we give things a sequel because we want to see more from these characters in these worlds, right? But some things, in my opinion, shouldn't be sequelized. Like as I mentioned, when I first completed Ready Player One, I wanted more, but I didn't want more from these characters. I felt that these characters' stories had, begin and ended fantastically. I didn't need a continuation. I didn't know what I needed to know what happened next to them. For the way the first book ends is that they all live happily ever after. Wade wins, and him and his mates that helped him win the competition. He splits the fortune. They split the fortune between them, so they're all billionaires. They split the company between them all, so they all have share in the company of the Oasis. Wade gets with his girlfriend. All the Soto and Etch, they go off and they live happy lives. And overall, it just ends nicely for all the characters. They all go off happy lives. The Oasis is saved. The end. It just works. Granted, I wanted more, but I wanted more from other characters, other teams of people. Other things going on, and then these other characters could have came in as Easter eggs. They could have came in as sort of cameos. Making appearances, that sort of thing. If there was ever to be a sequel, but Ready Player Two is a carry on from the first book. It takes the characters from the first one and then carries on their story. And when I first heard that, I was excited because, like I said, I wanted a sequel. But I was a bit sort of like on the fence, like I don't know if I need to know any more about these characters. Like their story ended so perfectly, and then when you get to reading this book, I was just disheartened of what happened to the characters. Like this book picks up as soon as the last book ended. It carries on almost straight away, probably like a week or two afterwards. The first book ended. And you have Wade, who is now, like I said, a billionaire living in Holiday's old house. He also has the robes of Anorak, which are basically magic robes that he can wear in the Oasis in virtuality that gives him basically supreme alpha and omega sort of access. He can't be killed. He can teleport anywhere. He can basically do anything he wants. He has complete control of the Oasis. And it's kind of strange because reading the first book, and I've read it twice, and I've lent it out to friends, and they've all enjoyed it. You know, I know these characters quite well. I know their it sounds quite weird, but I know their thoughts, their feelings. You know, how they act and how they feel. Then when I read this book, the characters just didn't feel how they did in the first book. Like, I understand money changes people. No matter how strong-willed you are, money changes a lot of people. Now there are some people out there who money doesn't change, who actually money isn't a thing. Like, yeah, I've got it, but like it's not something that really matters to me, you know. But for some people, it does change them. And I understand in the terms of Wade, where he had poverty. He didn't have nothing. He had no money. Then he won sort of the quest, and now he's a billionaire, and he owns one of the biggest sort of profitable company in human history. And I get it, you know, that power, not having any of it, you know, might change you, but it also, in my feelings, it felt like it might make him more humble. But he doesn't. You know, Wade for the first part of this book is a dick. He's a knobhead. He is. He's horrible. He's horrible to his girlfriend, who eventually leaves him. You know, he's horrible to his mates. He basically misuses his power and basically pervs. Like, I say pervs. When I say perv, I don't mean sort of perving. I just mean he kind of looks when he shouldn't look at other people's conversations. Because one of the things that the robes of Anorak does is that it allows you to join, to be around other people, be invisible, undetectable, so no one knows that you're there. You know, you can spy on other people's private conversations and chat threads, um, that sort of thing. You know, and he was using it. He was doing that. He was perving on his ex, on other people in the Oasis. He was trolling people. He turned into a giant knobhead, right? And I was reading. I was like, this is not how I imagine Wade to be. You know, this is not how the Wade that I know from the first book would act. You know, and it was his mates as well. The only person who remained the same was Artemis, which was Wade's girlfriend. She was completely the same. She never changed. She was the same character from the first book. You know, but you know, Soto and Etch, they're all knobheads. You know, again, they had money. It changed them. They basically completely ignored Wade. They just no longer spoke to him, and they were all off doing whatever they were doing and wasting their money and blah blah blah, all that. And then him, like Wade and his other mate, were like building a spaceship just because the world's falling to pieces. So they decided to build a spaceship, back it up with all sort of human history, and with virtuality sort of simulation, like a copy of the Oasis, so that, you know, if the world was to go to pot, they could jump ship into the spaceship and leave, but still be in the Oasis, right? It completely messed up, completely sort of messed up. And I'm like, as I'm reading, I'm thinking, this is not what any of these characters would do. None of these characters would act this way. Why are they all being complete and utter knobheads? You know, I get it. Money changes you, but I just don't understand. Like these characters, I felt had more resolve, was stronger willed than that. You know, and like I said, Artemis was the only one that really sort of stayed the same. You know, that she never let the money change. Actually, she used the money to try to help the world because, as I mentioned, the world's going apart. There's poverty everywhere. There's wars. There's crime. There's famine. Climate change has completely taken over. The world is shit. So, in this world, people escape the real world to the Oasis because the real world is so bad. So Artemis tries to use her billions and her billions to make the world a better place, and she tries to kind of encourage her other sort of fellow billionaires to do the same. None of them want to. They just be like, oh, but you know, but we put like we shut the Oasis down for 1 day, 1 to 2 days every week. You know, we've limited this amount of time, and we've improved this. So you know, and she's like, but you made a spaceship to leave this planet. Like, it's not a spaceship. It's not an ark that's going to take all of us. It's just you rich fuckers. You know what I mean? And she really hates them. And she kind of like, you know what? Especially Wade. She's like, you know what? Fuck you. Fuck you. That's it. I'm gone. I'm not going to talk to any of you. And she goes. And then Wade basically, he discovers while moping around in his sort of castle, because in the Oasis he gets given the castle of James Holiday, which is kind of like a only he can go into this castle. Only he can go into this one sacred room. Only he has access to it. Only the person who has access to the robes of Anorak can get in to this place. So he's moping around his little office. He finds an Easter egg. The Easter egg that he won. He's playing it with his hands, turns it around, and finds that there was an inscription that wasn't there originally when he first won it. And basically, the inscription basically tells him to go to this vault and type in this code in the main sort of real world headquarters for the Oasis. So he jumps out, goes down, goes into this vault, finds this new headset, basically realizes that this new headset's called the O&I, and that it's a kind of like I don't know if anybody's heard about it, but Elon Musk. I know somehow I've gotten to Elon Musk, but bear with me, please. But Elon Musk in the real world, he is trying to create a technology he calls Neuralink, and the basic idea between Neuralink is that you put loads of probes or stuff into your head. This is what the concept is at the moment, but you put a lot of probes in that onto your head, and it takes a scan of your brain, and then it will allow you to talk kind of telepathically from person to person, but also it will allow you to download data off the internet so that you'd never need to study because you're just a genius because you download it. It's really weird. And eventually the idea behind that technology is that it's not a headset, it's like a chip that you stick into your brain, and that will make you super intelligent because you can access the internet using this chip, and kind of like very cyberpunky. That's kind of what this O&I is. The only difference, it's a headset. It's a headset attachment that goes onto the Oasis headset, and what it does is that once you put it on, it clamps onto your head, and you have about 12 hours of access. But what it allows you to do, because it taps into your brain, it allows you to touch and feel and taste in the Oasis. You know, if you get shot, for example, in the Oasis, you can feel the bullet wound, and you can actually generally feel it, and it hurts. You know, because obviously the way obviously we don't know how the human brain works, but the idea behind the human brain is the fact of whenever you cut yourself or burn yourself, through your nervous system. So if you burn your hand, a quick jolt goes up to your brain, basically tells your brain like, oh God, you know, you've hurt yourself. And then there's a quick sort of message gets sent from the brain down to your hand, basically to tell you to, you know, move your hand, you know, stop it, you're going to burn yourself. And that all happens in the blink of an eye, in a split second. You don't even realize it. Bam, bam, you know, ow, that hurt. But straight away there was a message. And it's that sort of idea of, you know, you can touch and feel things, but also you can taste things in the Oasis because somehow in the brain it taps into that one part of the brain that deals with taste, that deals with how you the way things feel in your mouth and that sort of thing. So that whole concept of that sort of thing was interesting, and I was interested to see how it would be used. It doesn't get used that much. Like, it's kind of like a gimmick. It's like, oh, it's this new technology, you can now feel things. And then this is where, again, where like the main characters apart from Artemis are being dicks, because when he finds this technology, he basically puts it on, and a video gets played by James Holiday, basically saying like, this is my last big invention, but when I was alive I wasn't sure if this technology should be released or not, so I leave it to my heir to basically figure out if or not I should release it onto the world. So then sort of Wade goes back to his mates, basically says, shall we release it? They all go, yeah, we should release it. Artemis is like, no. Me reading the book, I'm like, yeah, no. Like, I understand the benefits this might give to a lot of people, but at the same stage, I don't feel like the world's already burning as it is. So if you give them this, where it's like gives them more reason to not give a shit about the world and more reason to hide away into a computer, you know, maybe not release it. But you know, it was 3-1. Nobody listened to Artemis. They released the technology. Bada bing, bada boom. The story basically begins from there. Really, you do get the beginning of the book, like I said, where you get a lot of moping for a good few chapters of just Wade feeling sorry for himself, being a knob, trolling people, trying to figure out, you know, he hates himself as well because what he did with Artemis, but he's also very alone. But he also kind of hates himself more because he can't figure out the riddle. He can't figure out sort of how to crack this new Easter egg. Because one of the things with this new headset was the fact of if you release it, a new Easter egg would sort of happen, and it was the Siren Soul. And the idea was is that you get 7 different riddles, kind of a linking towards the whole idea of Harry Potter, where you get like the Horcrux, and Voldemort separates his soul 7 times. It's that idea of like us to put a soul together. You need 7 different parts of a soul, kind of like a hint towards Harry Potter. Not on, it never sort of mentions it, but I was like, yeah, this is a Harry Potter reference. But Wade kind of hates himself because he can't figure it out, and he becomes more and more like knobbish and more sort of rich and very much Scrooge McDuck. Um, but like the story goes on from there, and the middle of the story, it's just, it's just the beginning was so much of a ball ache that by the time I got to the middle, that I wasn't interested in a lot of what was going on. You know, I there was a section like I'm not a big fan of Prince. I like Prince, but I'm not a die-hard Prince fan. And there's a whole sort of chapter dedicated to Prince because they go to a world dedicated to Prince, and they have like a legendary sort of like guitar battle between him and the Revolution, and Prince. And it's an interesting, but like I was reading it, I'm like, by this stage, I was so tired and I was kind of bored, and I just skimmed through a lot of it. Um, and that's the problem. Like first impressions to anything is key. If you can't hook the reader at the beginning, if you can't hook the viewer or the gamer at the beginning, it's kind of hard to get somebody hooked in the middle or to the end. You know. So when everything was coming to a close towards the end, I just wanted it to end. Like, I didn't want them to. It wasn't the fact of, oh, I want them to win. I want them to save the day. It was more just the fact of, okay, we're at the end now. I don't really sort of care. I just want it to end so I can read something else. Um, like the villain in it is kind of interesting. The villain is a digital copy of James Holiday with all Holiday's memories. That is basically, it's like a rogue AI that basically is like, I want you to get all the Siren Souls, so that I can have somebody who's like me, and I won't be alone. But basically, I have everybody who has an ONI system, who has basically one of them sort of new headsets, which is most people in the Oasis. Everybody has one because Wade made them dirt cheap so everybody could experience it. That he's basically did a new update saying everybody who puts one on now is locked in, and that if after the 12, if you don't solve this puzzle within 12 hours, everybody is going to have basically a brain overload, where basically your brain goes overclock and you go into a coma and die. Right? You get major headaches and fatigue, and eventually your brain gets so sort of tired that you go into a coma and you die basically. You have like a seizure sort of thing. And that was the threat. It was like, if you don't solve this puzzle, these different sort of riddles, and get me the Siren Soul before 12 hours is up, everybody in the world who's logged in is gonna die, including you. And that what that kind of means, like, it's an interesting sort of premise. It raises the stakes, but what that means for the book is then that the one of the things that I loved about the first book was the fact of, you could tell there was time passing, and that it took Wade a while on his own, as well as with some friends, to kind of solve the puzzle, to solve the Easter eggs, to solve the riddles, to figure out where the Easter eggs were hiding and how to solve the Easter eggs and how to win them. Time was being passed, and the book felt like it had it taken a while to get to it. He'd earned it. You know what I mean? He'd worked to earn it. But in this book, because you have the whole 12 hours to kind of solve the riddle, that it's kind of the fact of, it's rushed. It's like, oh, we did this one riddle, now we're going to do this next riddle. And so just sort of ironically, one person that I'm friends with knows everything about this one place that we're going to. I got one friend that's a really big major Prince fan and knows everything, and can easily help me win this. And I get it. It's that whole idea of friendship and the whole idea that, if you work together, you can get it done. But it's also the fact of, I felt rushed. I felt like we're going from one section to another. Oh, we found another piece of the riddle. We found another shard. Okay, on to the next one. Okay, on to the next one. There was no time to rest. There's no time to breathe. And for a lot of people, that's great. Like it constantly, like the story's constantly going. But for me, it was the fact of I want them to at least struggle. I want some at least some strife. I want some moments of self doubt. A bit like that problem solving, trying to figure it out, not just I know the answer. Okay, all that build up. You could have at least done a bit of build up where you tried to plan it, and they do he does a little bit. Ernest Klein, he does for a little bit, but not enough. You don't get enough of a build up. It's just the fact of it could be this. No, it could be this. What about this? That's it. That's the one. Okay, we're going to this planet, and then we solve it, and done. You know, um, there were a few sort of cool sort of references. There was a reference to the Silmarillion. There was a whole sort of chapter on the Silmarillion that I really, really liked because a big Lord of the Rings fan, a big Middle Earth fan. I've read the Silmarillion. I've read a lot of the Tolkien books that deal with Middle Earth, the fall of Numenor, Brevary and Aluthien, the Children of Húrin. I've read them all. I understand the story. And so it was just fun when they were talking about the different ages. You've got the first age, which is elves and the Numenorians, and then you got the second age, which is men, dwarves, and Balrogs, and the rise of Sauron. And then you've got the third age, which is hobbits and Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, that sort of thing. Um, and I like that. That was fun for me. I enjoyed that chapter because I'm a Lord of the Rings fan. There were other sort of ones as well, other sort of references. I felt like Captain America in the first Avengers movie, where he's kind of sitting there, going, "Oh, that reference. I get that reference." Yeah, you know. Um, so there were moments like that, and I like those sort of moments. But they were few and far between. And again, the beginning set put me in such a bad sort of left such a bad taste in my mouth that I just didn't enjoy the characters as much. And I was sitting there reading this, going, "This didn't need to be written. This sequel wasn't needed. It didn't have to be written. It shouldn't have been written." And I come back to what I said at the beginning of this part, where I said, no sequel in history of ever needed to be made. We love our sequels, we do, but it didn't need to. I love the MCU to bits. I love the way the MCU is now, but we could have just had Iron Man, and that's it. And Iron Man 1 would have been a fantastic standalone superhero movie, you know. But no, we did a sequel. We did more movies, and we did Iron Man 2, which I quite liked Iron Man 2. A lot of people don't. I quite liked Iron Man 2. But the point is I'm trying to make is the fact of you no sequel is ever needed. We just do them because we like to do them. We do them because of money. We do them because we enjoy them. We do them because we want to see more from these characters in these worlds. But this is one of the moments where this didn't need to be written. And if it was written, it didn't need to feature the main characters from the first book, because their story in the first book ended so perfectly, as I mentioned, that honestly I would have been happy if we never saw them again ever. It wouldn't have bothered me because their stories ended so well. It all ended happily. And it's the same with this book. At the end of this book, it's a happy ending. It ends almost the exact same. Wade and Artemis get back together again. Etch is basically doing what Etch was doing at the end of the first book, which is going off living life. And the only difference is that I think Wade gets married to Artemis, which they weren't about doing that anyway, and they end up having a kid on the way. And I think Soto, he ends up having a kid as well. That's the only real difference. But apart from that, they all end happily. The book ends the same way the first book ended. The only difference in this book is the fact of the spaceship that they was building. They basically set it off into space with all human history, with some embryos, and the AI constructions of Ogden Morrowind, who was James Holliday's friend, and Kira, Og's wife, who was the siren that her soul you had to put together, made her. And then the ship went off into space, and that was it. Um, that's the end of the book. And I was just like, you better not make a Ready Player 3. And if you do make a Ready Player 3, I want other characters. I don't want these characters anymore. Like, I want their characters to end. I want to hear about other stories in the Oasis. I want to hear about other people in the Oasis. I want to hear other more things about how the real world is. You know, how the real world is affected by the choices of these characters. You know, yeah, it's just not as good as the first book. Like, it shouldn't have been written. I wanted it. I got it. Wasn't happy with it. Again, hype just kills it. I was hyped. A lot of other people. If you look on Goodreads, you look at the rating compared to this one, and uh, actually, I can get it on my tablet. Let me get my tablet up. So if you look at the rating between Ready Player One and Ready Player Two, it's incredibly low. It's embarrassingly low, to be honest. Like, um, and I don't, and I understand why. You know, when I first read the book, and I had other friends who'd read it before me because I got it late, and obviously I read it late. I didn't read it when it first came out. I finished it a couple of weeks ago, um, but I had a lot of friends who'd read it, and they were like, "Oh, dude, I didn't like it. It didn't sit well with me. It wasn't that good." Um, and I can understand. Now I've read it, I can understand why, because it's the fact of, you read the first book and you get blown away by the first book, then you read this book and it's like, ugh. So I've got it up here on my tablet. So Ready Player One, it's got, out of 1,031,223 ratings, it's got a score of 4.24, which is incredible. You know, it's a really good score, right? Ready Player Two, this is not the amount. This is the amount of people on Goodreads. This is not the amount of people who read it and bought it overall, right? So it's just the people that have read it and have added it to their Goodreads and said they've read it, right? So for Ready Player Two, 120,000. So we haven't even reached the million part yet. 120,867 ratings with a score of 3.43, right? Now, if we scroll down to the rating details, only 16% of people that read this book gave it a 5 star. 32%, right, gave it a 4. 33%, which is me, I gave it 3 stars. 13% gave it 2, and only 4% gave it 1. Right, now, if we go back to Ready Player One and we look at the uh, data there, the ratings data, it's completely different, right? So 49% of people that read this book, right, gave it 5 stars. 31% gave it 4. 12% gave it 3. 3% only gave it 2, and only 1% of people gave it a 1 star, right? I gave it a 5 star. I still stand by that 5 star. I still, like, you know, usually you read a book and you loved it, and then you come back sometime later and you realize, oh, it's not as good as I remember, and you decide if you should change your sort of rating or your review. Um, but this is one of them sort of times where I stand by this book. I stand by how good the first book was. But Ready Player Two was just bleh. It just wasn't that good. It's a 3 star. It's still a good book. It's still at times well written. It's not meh. You know, it is meh, but like, I wouldn't rate it as a meh book. A meh, like, 1 star is shit. Like, it's not worth it. 2 stars is meh. So it's like, it's meh. You'll forget about it. Um, 3 stars is good. It's just a good book. That's it. There's nothing more or less. It's just good. Um, 4 stars is great. So any book that's 4 stars is a great book. Loved it. It was, fantastic. I enjoyed it. And 5 stars is excellent. Life changing, out of this world, blow my head off. Wow. You know. And this book is just good. There's nothing else to say about it. Otherwise, it's good, but it's not great. That's the basis of it. And I wish it was. I wish it was just as good. And I wish it was everything that I hoped it would be. But sadly, it isn't. And it all falls down to how bad that beginning is. The beginning is so bad that it put a bad taste in my mouth that I couldn't enjoy the rest of it. The middle bit is somewhat okay, and like the bits that Ernest Clyde talks about and deals with, somewhat interesting, with the old O and I, and like whenever Wade gets one of the crystals, he then inherits one of the memories of the lady whose soul he's putting together, Kira. Um, that's an interesting concept, the things that they deal with, and some of the references are cool. But overall, it just lost me. It lost me at the beginning, and it couldn't get me back for the end, sadly. Um, but yeah, so that's Ready Player Two. I'm not that sold on it. I did miss a few things out, but there's not really much to say about it. Like I said, it's rushed. As soon as you get onto the whole sort of, oh, you've got 12 hours to solve this riddle, or everybody in this world dies, including yourself, um, the book just goes on full steam ahead and rushes to the end. And by the time you get to the end, you have an epic battle, which is pretty epic. There's a huge battle at the end, which is really epic. Um, but then it's just the fact of, okay, ending happened, and then it's just sort of a repeat of the end of the first book with a few differences, and then that's it. I've just sat there and read upwards of 366 pages for that. It's just one of them where books are like, I could have been reading something else. But yeah, so that's Ready Player Two. Nothing much more to say. It was a bummer, but it is what it is. So I'm going to end it quite nicely now. I know I haven't mentioned the movie, but as I was sort of in the break, I basically figured there's not really much to say about the film other than it was a good film. I enjoyed it. It was a good sort of retelling of the book. Obviously, they made some changes and they added some scenes that weren't into the book. My favourite being The Shining, when they go into The Shining. That's quite good how they reenacted that. Really funny, really great. And also the whole at the end where they have that big battle, and Etch basically pulls out one of her sort of artifacts, which was Chucky. And it's, oh my god, was that fucking Chucky? And then she just picks Chucky and throws him at somebody, and Chucky stabs somebody. It just made me laugh. But there's not much to say about the movie other than it's a good film. It's not as good as the book, but there's not many book to from book to film sort of tie-ins that are. Some are, but some aren't. But yeah, so that's everything. That is all she wrote. And off to the end, shall we? Because obviously I need a break because I'm starting to get a headache now talking about this book, and I need a quick break before we end off quite nicely. So let's go to the end, shall we? And that is all she wrote. Her boat is sailed. She got to port and she smoked a big cigar, and the fat lady stopped singing, and she finished. I really need to find a new way to end each section, don't I? I'm really bad at these endings, but you know that's not the point. What did you think of not of my endings, but what did you think of Ready Player One? What did you think of Ready Player Two? What did you think of the movie Ready Player One? Obviously, let me know on Twitter. Um, I know they're going to make a sequel. They're going to make a movie. If I remember correctly, when the rights for the first book film was being written up, when it came out, I do remember reading an article that said that they'd already bought the movie rights to the second book. This is before the second book was written. This is when kind of Ernest Cline said that he was going to write a second book. Now, my question is, did he write a second book because of the money, of the fact of, you know, like he didn't have an idea, or he wasn't going to make a sequel, and then the movie for the first book came out, and sort of all the people at the studio heads was like, well, but we'll pay you, say, I don't know the money, I don't know how much money it was, but let's sort of throw a bit of money out. Let's say we're going to pay you half a billion, so we're going to give you $500 million, right, for the rights to Ready Player One and a potential sequel, Ready Player Two, right? We'll do it right now. We'll sign the contract. Are you interested? Was it the fact of, okay, we'll pay you this loads of money to do it, and he was like, well, I'll write a sequel, I guess, and that's the kind of that makes me think in terms of this book is the way it feels is the fact of was this book written because of the money, or was it written because he wanted to write it? I don't know, but there is going to be a Ready Player Two movie. I don't know as to when they'll get around to doing it. I do hope because like they made changes to Ready Player One, the first book, and the changes they made weren't really big substantial changes. It was just a few sort of added scenes to kind of um, they kind of changed certain scenes around to make it a little bit more fun in a movie sense, which makes sense. But I just kind of feel and hope that if they do make a movie of the second book, that they fix the beginning. They fix the character basically being a knob, and they fix all the other characters being knobs. Like they can have him being somewhat sort of brooding because again you're rich, you're lonely. You could do that. Just take the knobbish side out of it, you know. But it does make me sit and think the fact of, did he write this book because he was given loads of money to write it? Oh, we need a sequel because the first movie made so and so amount of money. We need a sequel. We'll pay you to write a new book because we can't make a sequel without a new book. So we'll pay you to write a new book, and then we'll basically copy that book into a movie. Maybe because there are a lot of moments in this book where it feels like that would look good on film. That I would want to see that. Like the Prince thing. Even though I'm not a big Prince fan, and I skimmed a lot of it. Seeing the whole sort of Prince thing again. I don't know how they will get around to doing it because again, that legally to get all them those rights, all the different songs, and get the rights to Prince and get rights to the Prince symbol and the revolution and all that. I don't know how they would get around it, but like it would be an interesting and fantastical thing to see on screen, and that's what it feels like to me. Is the fact of did he sort of get coerced into doing it for money? I don't know. I like no. This is all just my theory. None of it was written down, or anything like that. So I've got to kind of cover myself for legal reasons. Um, but yeah, it just interests me. But it is what it is. It's out now. I've read it, and I don't need to read it anymore. Um, but yeah, so let me know on Twitter at nerdstalgic_pod what your thoughts and feelings. Do you like the first book? Have you read the second book? I would recommend if you love the first book, don't read the sequel because it might ruin it for you. It hasn't for me. But I have a feeling this might ruin the series for a lot of people. Just read the first book. The first book's amazing. Don't worry about the sequel. It's not needed. It just yeah, it's just not needed at all. So yeah, let me know on Twitter at nerdstalgic_pod. Also, you can find this podcast on Spotify. You can find it on Anchor, on Google Podcasts, Amazon Music Podcasts. Also, I want to say thank you to World of Books for sponsoring this episode and sponsoring the show. Again, don't forget to use my code NERDY10 at checkout to save yourself 10% off on all your orders, and let them know that I sent you because they're fantastic and I love them and I want to do more things with them in the future. And if one big important, this is a big important thing, but if you listen to this on Spotify, don't forget to rate my podcast on there. If you go onto my profile on Spotify, you will find underneath my banner icon, you will find a star rating. If you click on that, it will give you an option between 5 stars and 1 star. 5 stars being the best thing you heard in your life, 1 star being Vogons doing poetry, the worst thing you ever heard ever. So you choose 1 to 5 stars, whatever you feel like is fair. That really, really helps me out because it pulls me up the algorithm. The more sort of star ratings I get, the higher I go up, and the more people will see my show. So all well and good. Also, I'm on YouTube. If you go onto YouTube and type in the Nerdstalgic podcast, you'll find my flaming face on there. As of recording this, I've been a bit sort of lazy and I haven't uploaded any more older episodes onto there as of yet. But hoping to do that sometime this week. Fingers crossed. So still, check out the YouTube, subscribe, like, and all that. Share with your friends, get the word out. It's just I mainly did just to make the show more accessible. I just want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to. I know it sounds a bit big-headed, but it just gives everybody the opportunity to hear my voice and to hear what I'm talking about and to be more accessible. So make sure to check out the Nerdstalgic podcast on YouTube. And that is all she wrote. That is everything. So as always, thank you for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope you enjoyed it again, as always. And I have been your host, Luke, and thank you once again for listening to the Nerdstalgic podcast with me. All right, guys. Cheerio.